All right, everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining us at the next installment of the GVI Workshop Series. Today's topic is Community Moral Voices. So just a little bit of background on our organization, and if you've attended one of these workshops before, you might be familiar, but we just like to go over it every time so everyone is kind of caught up on our organization. So the National Network for Safe Communities, or NNSC, is an action research center based here in New York at John Jay College for Criminal Justice that implements proven strategic interventions to reduce violence. NNSC reduces violence, builds trust, and transforms public safety in partnership with communities around the world. So what are these workshops? This workshop series is meant for new, interested, and returning partners to this work of violence prevention. The National Network is a network, so it's a network of cities and jurisdictions around the country and world that we have ongoing relationships with that we help to pursue violence prevention work. But these workshops are meant for folks and sites that we aren't yet formally working with, or folks who are new working on this type of work specifically. They're a space to learn about and discuss violence prevention, focused deterrence, and any other new innovations in the field. Each session, you'll hear from experienced NNSC staff members, some of our external partners, and you'll participate in roundtable conversations as you kind of learn and grow with the work. Each session is open to all who are interested in exploring the GVI approach to violence reduction in their community, whether it's municipal workers, law enforcement, academics, researchers, support and outreach workers. Anyone who is involved in any work that touches on these topics is welcome to join us. So today's topic is Community Moral Voices, and we're going to jump into a couple of great presentations by my colleagues Talib Hudson and Isabel Rojas. But before that, we're just going to do a quick 4 or 5 minute breakout session. We'll go around, get a sense of who's joining us today. Just say hello, where you're from, why you're here. Then we'll rejoin in the main session and begin today's presentation. Everyone is back in the main session, so thank you again for joining us. And I'm now going to hand it over to my colleague Talib Hudson, who's going to talk a bit about last session, which was support and outreach, and kind of how that connects to today's topic of community moral voices, and then begin a presentation on the substance of community moral voices in our work. So over to you, Talib.
All right, great. You would think I would learn how to figure out the how to mute and unmute at this point. So thank you very much, Michael, for that. So as Michael said, last time in our installment, our latest installment of the GVI Workshop Series, we did talk about support and outreach as part of the overall strategy of GVI. And just as a reminder, we do call GVI a three-legged stool. So there's the strategic law enforcement, community voice, and support and outreach. And then the project manager is the seat of said three-legged stool. So one of the things that we talked about, the core philosophy around support and outreach, about it being unconditional, about how it's really not about carrot and stick, but really about treating people with dignity and worth, and as human beings worthy of human beings worthy of love and respect and redemption, just from a moral and just position. And yes, that there may be that we do want to hold people accountable, but that if folks are in need of support, then we provide that support and we go and reach out to them wherever that they may be, and the importance of partnerships for that. And then we went through a multi-tiered structure of what that support and outreach could look like, from coordination, initiation, stabilization, restoration, and then proliferation. And part of that proliferation piece, if anyone remembers from the last time, was about kind of civic and community engagement. And that's a bit where some of the community moral voice aspect is going to come into play for today's discussion. So let me just slide over here and put up my section. Screen, and all right. Am I set on the share screen? Do I have all right, I'm seeing a thumbs up. Great. So community moral voice. First of all, what is the community moral voice? What are we even talking about with community moral voice? This rests on the philosophy that community members, right, have moral authority and influence with the community to affect change. And that moral authority, we want to make sure that we're clear that one of the key things about moral authority is who do the primary population that we're serving, those who are involved who are most at risk of violence, who do they see as moral authorities? Who do they see as folks who are credible? So someone might say that a local mayor might be a moral authority and should be part of community moral voice, and that might be the case. But if the local mayor is not necessarily seen as a moral authority in the community, and particularly amongst the group members, then that might not be the right person. Conversely, there may be the school crossing guard that has known everyone in the community from when they were kids to being middle-aged adults with their kids, now their kids for the past 40 years. And everybody, I don't care who you are, what you're involved in, everybody looks up to, a character reference I use is Miss Ming, right? I'll just use my late grandmother, who was a school crossing guard, Mrs. Cunningham. Mrs. Cunningham, from Grant Projects, from my parents are from. Everybody knew Mrs. Cunningham until the day that she passed away, right? And so someone like that is someone within the community who has moral authority and influence, and we'll get more into that. I do also want to point out that community moral voice is a distinctive component within the strategy. Sometimes the community moral voice can get tended to be rolled in support and outreach, or sometimes be overlooked as a whole. But it is distinctive. It is its own thing, and it is, in order to have a really thriving implementation. It really is key to be able to have a key distinctive component, and this is surrounding the core principle of one of the core principles of NNSC's work, and that's strengthening communities' capacity to prevent violence. And so I want to reiterate something that I mentioned in last month's installment. Is I want to dispel the notion that GVI is a policing strategy. That is incorrect. That is inaccurate. GVI is not a policing strategy. It is a violence reduction strategy, a violence prevention strategy, a violence prevention strategy that includes strategic law enforcement, community moral voice, and support and outreach. And so it's really important to really have those three components to be robust. And I really want to make sure I clarify that, because sometimes I read news articles or I see things out there, even some things that NNSC has said from years ago, either implicitly or explicitly makes the point of the notion that GVI is first and foremost a policing strategy that has other components looped in. So I want to make sure I really hammer that point home, that it is a violence prevention, violence reduction, violence intervention strategy that rests on strategic law enforcement, community moral voice, and support and outreach. So the traditional role of community moral voice, and if you've seen any of our old guides or any of the things that we've put out 2014, 2015, 2016, you may have seen around community moral voice, we talk about messaging at calling, the voice of pain, the voice of redemption, the voice of aspiration. The voice of pain traditionally has been someone who has lost a family member to gun violence, typically a mother, could be a father or some other family member, but typically it's a mother who has lost a child to gun violence, and they come and tell their story at the call-in in order to penetrate through the veneer and facade of toughness that many folks who are in groups carry in order for their own protection to stay safe in the street life. Sometimes having a mother figure can pierce through that facade. And so that's one of the main traditional roles. There's the voice of redemption, which is someone who is usually formerly incarcerated and or formerly in the life themselves, but who has since made a turnaround and is doing very well and is successful, and has in essence redeemed themselves, and can be a motivating and influential person for the folks who are within the call-in. And then there's the voice of aspiration, Typically, this may have in the past has been someone who may be a clergy member or local activist who tries to provide a uplifting and inspiring and message for folks, for the folks in the calling to aspire to. And that's been sort of the kind of the traditional role of how community moral voice has been pitched. In the more modern role, the community moral voice is much more central to the overall implementation, again, as one of those main legs of the stool, to build support for persons most at risk of violence, challenge those norms that perpetuate violence, and to build relationships with partners that can support community change. So what does that mean? Well, one, building support means that sometimes there may be some cities, some jurisdictions may not have many resources allocated for folks who are within the core population that we're talking about. Maybe it's just not a political priority, or some folks think that the core population is not worthy. But the community moral voice can, in an organized way, build support and say, no, we need resources. No, we do need the project manager, or support and outreach manager to be able to have unrestricted funds, so that if they need to buy somebody diapers at a moment's notice, that they can do that. Or if they need to get someone a hotel room at a moment's notice, that's important, that this isn't something that it is important to the community. Or, the local nonprofit, that's if it's like, in some locations, you may only have one or two, maybe three large nonprofits or community foundations that provide most of the support and the funding. And the community moral voice can tell those entities, those institutions, those agencies, no, we want support. We don't just want handcuffs for folks who are involved and most engaged in violence. We also want other resources, and we want other avenues. We want other things, other needs to be met for this core population. So community moral voice, folks can really speak out to that. To challenge norms that perpetuate violence means both in and outside of the community. So sometimes there can be prevalent thoughts that may say that if somebody does something to me, or hurts me or harms me, I am obligated to respond in kind or words, right? And someone hurts me, I'm obligated to try to hurt them. And the community moral voice, by having unified messaging, can say, no, like that's not what we want. One example of this, I'm gonna date myself a bit, but when I was a kid, hip hop at the time had very strong anti-violence messaging. There was a record that was very popular called Self-Destruction that I used to listen to over and over as a kid. And that was a lot of the rappers from the East Coast. And then a few years later, a lot of the rappers from the West Coast came up with a song that said, we're all in the same gang, right? And so those are two prime examples of community members that challenge norms that perpetuate violence, right? That we don't want to destroy ourselves. We're not in these different gangs and groups and cliques. We're all part of the same family, and we all want peace at the end of the day. And then the third part in building relationships is really, really super important. And that's about building relationships with partners to support community change. That goes to the first point that I talked about, building support, but that also means holding partners accountable. That means having hard conversations. That means telling if there's a support and outreach manager and support and outreach agencies and organizations, community moral voice can maybe let them know, hey, listen, we know you're doing your best, and we know that you're doing what you can with what you have, but here's some needs that are still being met. Here's what we're hearing in the community. Here's what we're hearing in the streets. We're hearing that someone is wanting to call a 24-hour hotline at 2 a.m. and nobody's answering. Hey, what's going on with that, right? Holding partners accountable, with working with law enforcement to say, law enforcement says we want to do a strategic enforcement action. Well, what does that look like, right? What does that mean if law enforcement says we want to engage in certain activities that law enforcement may think may keep the community safe, but it's worth having a conversation with the community moral voice to say, hey, is this legitimate? Like, if we do sweeps, corner sweeps, is that something that people in the community, right? How is that going to be received, right? Are you on board with us to be able to do that? And folks may say, yes, we are, and we will go forth and spread the word that we have asked law enforcement to do this. Or they may say, no, as a matter of fact, we don't think that's a legitimate way. to address violence right now. We don't think hotspots, is going to work. That's not going to work for us. Let us try something different, right? So the community moral voice has a really, really key role in holding partners accountable. I do also want to point out that the community moral voice is probably one of the few areas in this strategy where the majority of the folks may not be paid, right? So with law enforcement, this is their job, right? With support and outreach, typically, this is their job, even though we all know that support and outreach typically is underfunded. But for community moral voice, like there may not necessarily be a job there for someone. And so just to respect that people are giving of their time, right? In community moral voice, you want folks who are not necessarily always involved in all the anti-violence issues. You want folks who represent a broad swath of the community, right? And so again, to just be cognizant about what roles people play and how they get in where they fit in, and respecting that, again, for a lot of folks, this is on top of their already busy daily lives, and that they're coming to this work as community members. But it's also a great way to get multiple partners involved, especially when people say, hey, well, we don't know where we fit in. So let's talk about more specific ways that folks can be involved. So there's some direct elements. We'll talk about direct elements and then indirect elements that folks can be involved in community moral voice. One, we highly recommend having a community moral voice working group. And that is a group of people that meets regularly, that can discuss many of the same things that I just mentioned, right? How is the partnership going? How is the overall implementation going? Are there different things that the community moral voice leaders need to be doing? Are there different things that law enforcement needs to be doing? Are there different things that support and outreach needs to be doing? In an ideal world, the community moral voice working group would be connected to in some way a larger governing board or oversight structure, which is another conversation not for this video, but if we haven't already covered it in a previous workshop, I'm sure we'll cover it in an upcoming workshop. But we really want an overall oversight structure, and then to the community moral voice working group that taps into that structure. Again, just to make sure everyone is being held accountable to doing their best for the safety of everyone. So we highly recommend having a community moral voice working group. And who would help organize that? The seats, the project manager, of course, right? It's not going to be law enforcement that does it. We've seen people try to do that, and we highly do not recommend that you try to have your law enforcement put together your community moral voice working group. Similarly, we don't think your support and outreach to be the people putting together your community moral voice working group either. They can have input, of course, but again, that project manager is the seat. That's really that central role that's making sure that all of these pieces are working together. One way that folks can participate is going on a custom notification. Now, one thing I told one of sites that I was advising a couple of years ago, that there's no such thing as a spectator on a custom notification. Sometimes you've seen folks say, well, I just want to just see what the custom is like, and I just want to kind of check. No, if you're going to go on a custom notification, you must have a specific role. You must be doing something that is supportive of this overall effort, and that means talking to people and engaging with them, because we don't want people to receive a custom notification and then have someone else watching them in the back as like they're some kind of zoo animal, right? Outside engagement with group population, you may have community moral voice members that on their own is engaging with members that are believed to be at risk, and that can be and should be in coordination with any support and outreach efforts, because it is a form of outreach. But it can be a more informal way of outreach, right? It could be a less structured way, especially in certain communities that are really small, where everybody knows everybody, right? Or in certain communities that are really large, where everybody doesn't know everybody. Support and outreach can't possibly reach everyone. They don't have the bodies to get to every single nook and cranny of the neighborhood. But there are folks who informally may know of folks and can tap into that and can engage with folks who are believed to be most at risk of violence. They can participate in CPRVV. This is an element that we've spoken about in previous videos. Communities and police responding to victims of violence. If someone is shot, there is a delegation that can go to the family to express support and sorrow, and just just sit with people, just be with them. You may want to have a community moral voice member who wants to do that. More general community outreach, whether it's passing out flyers, letting people know about the GVI strategy overall, letting people know about particular resources, right? It doesn't have to just be the support and outreach folks, right? As we talked about previously, the person who might be doing direct street outreach is not going to also be the person who might not be able to be everywhere and do everything in all the different community needs as much as they would like to, right? And so the community moral voice may be able to do that. And then there's, of course, the effective messaging at call-ins part, which we discussed as part of the more traditional roles of being part of community moral voice. Now, some of the more indirect elements, this is for ways to involve community members that may not necessarily be part of a specific working group, right? They may not be totally keyed into GVI's strategy. They may not even like GVI's strategy and think it's horrible, right? But sometimes it's good just to have people involved, because the whole point about GVI, again, we're strengthening the community's capacities to prevent violence. It's not about whether you are a fan. This is not about who likes the local politician. This is not about who does or does not love law enforcement, who backs the blue or doesn't. That's not what this is about, right? And so sometimes a great way to have a stronger and more robust implementation is to bring in people who are skeptical, right? And give them a role and a seat at the table, right? And so that could be something as community shooting reviews, right? So we talked about shooting reviews in a previous video, I believe, and where law enforcement may share information about what are the shootings that have happened in the community week by week. Without sharing personally identifiable information or anything that is law enforcement sensitive, but community members may just want to know, hey, like, what's going on? And not in the typical kind of report out numbers kind of way, right? Like, we had 5 fatals, 5 non, right? But no, like, this is what happened, right? This is what we believe happened. Again, not giving away investigatory sensitive information, but just in terms of communication with the community. Hey, did you know that there was a person shot on South Street last night? And this is our understanding. People just may be good for folks to know about that, right? Community walks and neighborhood canvassing is something that we see a number of cities do, right? Where you may have a range of different people from across the strategy, right? Whether you have law enforcement, community moral voice working group, got your support and outreach, and you to bring in the other community members who can't necessarily be engaged on a regular basis, but they may be able to come by on a Tuesday to do a community walk on a nice day, and the kids are coming along, and you're noticing, hey, like, that light needs to be fixed over there, or hey, like, that sidewalk is broken there, and then they're part of the strategy, right? And it's bringing people in to the strategy so that they also are a part of it. The one city that we worked with went to do a community cleanup, and I noticed that once this whole group of people showed up and were cleaning up the neighborhood, other people who were there just started cleaning up too, because everybody was doing it, right? And it was like, oh well, shoot, I'm not gonna have the one with the dirty yard, right? Everybody's cleaning up the neighborhood, right? And there is research that shows, specifically some of the latest research by Gina South and her colleagues, that things like this actually have a real statistically significant impact on reducing violence. And then there's like media outreach, anti-violence messaging. Some cities, what they have done is they may have public service campaigns, right? Or maybe social media ads or radio ads or billboards, right? And again, it's not the billboards in and of themselves or the media in and of itself that is reducing violence necessarily, but it's in conjunction with all these other things, right? It's the whole package together. And these are indirect elements that engage folks in the community within your overall GVI strategy. Now, let's talk about who could be at the table. And there's a reason why I say who could be at the table and not who should be at the table. This is just an example, a list of an example of potential people you might want to have at the table. Clergy members or faith institutions, churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, what have you. Local community activists, especially the ones that are very vocal, right? And who could be very powerful as part of your strategy, right? So there's sometimes there are folks that it's better for them to be your friend than your enemy, right? So bring them in, right? public or elected officials. I remember one city I was working with, their county commission was really central to getting GVI in that jurisdiction, and they wanted a staff member from the head of the county commission, the chair, to be a part of a custom notification. And at first I was like, oh, this isn't the thing for politicians to come and take photos, and that's not what this is about. Well, it turns out they had a really amazing constituent services staffer who was a young male person who was just, was in the same, just fit right in with when we were going on the custom notification and talking to other young. And when I say young, I mean I'm in my 40s. So I'm talking about someone in their 20s. I'm not talking about a child. Someone who's like in their 20s, right? Who could relate and connect with the folks who were being customed in a different way than the 50-year-old pastor and the 60-year-old police sergeant, right? And they were able to say, we represent the county and we want you to be safe. We are providing resources for you to be safe. We want, this is a whole strategy. The whole community wants you to be safe, alive, and free. And I was blown away because that wasn't typically, again, going off our traditional conventional model, that wasn't what we normally did. And that showed me like, wow, this is really fantastic and really amazing. So that's why I say this who could be at the table, because it all depends on who you have in your jurisdiction, in your city, in your county, in your town. And then community service organizations. One thing I think we mentioned before, that not everybody is built, for anti-violence work. Not everybody's going to do support and outreach. Not everybody's going to be the person that has the patience or the cultural competence to directly engage and talk to folks who are most at risk of violence. Some people I want to go and tell the kids not to shoot. And I know you do. That might not be your role, right? However, you can pull in folks, with different service organizations, whether it be fraternities and sororities, your Kiwanis clubs, your Rotary clubs. You can bring them into the table and have them be at the table as well for some of the things that we talked about, whether it be community walks, neighborhood canvassing, showing up at the actual call-in if you have a call-in, right? Maybe going with people for the CPR/VV, right? There are different ways to plug people in, right? So it's about get in where you fit in, right? And the project manager, right, is a key person, again, who's that seat to help see, who could be the best person. We don't, in our model, yet have a community moral voice manager person just yet, because again, community moral voice is typically voluntary, it's typically unpaid, so it doesn't quite follow the same structure as law enforcement and support and outreach, who are working within usually paid institutions and paid roles and paid jobs. But you may want to have a chair of a community moral voice working group, for example, that can help coordinate some of these things and help figure out who should or who should not be at the table, right? Because like my colleague Paul always says, you got to know who to invite and you got to know who to disinvite. And if someone is not on the same wavelength, if they're not on the same philosophy as safe, alive, and free, of strengthening the community's capacity to prevent violence, of everybody is worthy of love and redemption and respect as a human being, regardless of what they have done. If they're not on that same wavelength, then maybe this isn't the thing for them. And there's a way that they can be helpful in the community and maybe some other way in some other role, but just not this. And they have talents and abilities that can be best used in another capacity. So again, these are just examples of who could be at the table, but not who should be at the table. That's got to be location specific. And then just to end, sustainability is important. How do you keep it going, right? Trust and communication is the foundation of any relationship, whether it's a marriage, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a employee-employer relationship. Trust and communication is the foundation of any relationship. And so that means that within the GVI strategy, right, when you've got the project manager as the seat, and then you've got these three legs: strategic law enforcement, community moral voice, support, and outreach. In order to sustain it, having that trust with each other and communication, I can't overemphasize it enough. Because trust is communication, communication leads to trust. And so it's important that if there are issues, right, that those issues are brought to the table and those issues are discussed, whether it's an issue with law enforcement, whether it's an issue with strategic support and outreach, law enforcement may say, hey, we didn't really feel supported when we had to do XYZ enforcement action, right? What's going on with that? And the community more voice said, well, maybe we didn't, weren't a big fan of that. Support and outreach may say, well, we also didn't like when such society, right? So, but it's important to be able to have those hard conversations, because that's where the real work is done, right? It's not the calling itself. It's not the custom itself, right? It's that partnership and that love for the community is the fuel that sustains these partnerships. And so to that end, definitely recommend doing some team building if you can find a way to do it, whichever way works best for you and your jurisdiction. And then as well as peer exchanges, we always recommend going to other cities, seeing how it's done, seeing the things you want to take away and you want to learn, or what you don't want to take away. Sometimes you may go another place and say, maybe we don't want to do it that way. We want to do it this way. We think this way worked for us. Again, as long as it's within that core philosophy. We say that the model is flexible, but the fundamentals are rigid, right? We want people safe, alive, and free, right? Meaning not incarcerated. We want to respect the dignity and worth of every single human being. We believe they're worthy of love and redemption, right? And we want to strengthen communities' capacity to prevent violence and work in partnership as a cohesive violence prevention, violence intervention, violence reduction strategy that includes strategic law enforcement, community moral voice, and support and outreach. So I know that I have talked to you for quite some time at this point, but I can give you an overview. I can tell you about what I've advised on. I can tell you about some of the things that I've seen on my travel, but it's another thing to talk to someone who's done it, who's lived it, who's walked the walk, who's been in the shoes, and who has had the hard conversations themselves, and has those examples, and got the battle scars to prove it, right? And has come out wiser and stronger, and has the experience and the wisdom to share and to be valuable to folks who are in various stages of implementation. So of course, I am talking about my colleague, Isabel Rojas, who is not only a former member of law enforcement in a previous life, a wonderful, active community member in her own right, but also a former project manager as well. And so has seen this model from many different sides, as she is now one of our team members here at the National Network, and is on the reconciliation and advising and whatever else we just keep throwing stuff at her. So she does so many things. So she has a wide breadth of perspective that she can share with you. So with that, I give it to my colleague, Isabel.
Thank you, Talib. You're really kind. Thank you so much. Well, I'm Isabel. So today I just want to highlight every city, as Talib had mentioned earlier, can do the work in different ways. And I just want to highlight that I'm coming from the project management perspective of the work that I did here on the ground in the city of Newburgh for 7 years. Up until last June, I was working out of the district attorney's office. So one thing that I want to say, the work that we're doing, Talib mentioned about the traditional roles and how we identify them and the folks that are in those roles. And one thing that we can all relate in this Zoom is COVID definitely came and taught us a different way of doing things, right? The traditional ways of doing things, we had to pivot and pivot fast, right? This is the beauty of Zooms, right? Of being able to connect with so many folks, right? And I'm pretty sure that a lot of people here can agree that Zooms have taken over. I believe also that in the work, as NNSC, Talib had mentioned earlier, we are moving into a direction of changing with the times, right? And we're trying to be as transparent as we can be. We all learn as we go along, right? I know that listening to Talib brought back so much when we talk about the traditional roles. When we started the work on the ground in Newburgh in 2015, our community moral voice kept shifting. And as I'm listening to Talib, there were certain things that we did that you might be already doing in your community and thinking, wait, is this part of the model? Could this be the model? And it might as well be. For instance, when Talib talked about the working groups and keeping folks at the table, one of the ways that I saw that worked really well at the time is all depends on also when you're working with your leadership, right? Your leadership has to be strong. We had a very strong supportive leadership when we started the work, and it was a testament of the people that were at the table with us. It was a testament of how we were doing the work in the streets. And that leadership in that police department was completely transparent with the community and the way that we were working. So we started off really, really strong because, again, the work is, we have to teach, we have to learn the ways that other people work, right? We walk into somebody's house, we have to learn their customs. So the same way for police officers to learn when they're working with the community outreach folks, they have to learn how how these folks move in the community. What are the expectations? Just like people have to, when the community came in to work with us, we had to explain the model and how we did the work and what are the expectations and what were our goals with the community. Because we were a partnership. And in order to have a partnership, we all have to know what each person is doing at the table. So one of the ways that really, really resonated with me back in, I want to say it was 2016, going into 17. It was a summer, we had shootings coming. I mean, there were a lot of things happening at the time. And when we talk about that community moral voice, right? We talk about that person that's there during the good time, that is just not there when they're doing the back to school backpack drive and they're there, doing the great things. And then they disappear when there's a shooting and now the community has to be, outside. So we had someone in that community that was really, really integrated in the community. We met at a local place, which was one of the neutral places in the city of Newburgh. And we talked to him and his friends about what was happening. We were out there doing custom notifications to quell the violence. It was the lieutenant, myself, and their intel detective. And we explained to him, we have this side beefing with this side. Shootings are up, they're going up. We're trying to plan a call in, but we need to do these custom notifications because we want the bloodshed to stop. He had been part of our call-in, so he already knew the model and knew what it was about. And the way that he so seamlessly came in, said, okay, we're going to take this part of town where you guys doing customs over there. I'm going to explain this to this side of town, and then we're going to cross over as you guys are going. So I can really tell folks that this is true, that, there is help available, that, you guys are the real deal. And can I say that that evening, and that wasn't, we didn't go out normal 9 to 5 hours. It was about 7:30, 8 o'clock at night on a summer night. Because again, when you're doing the work on the ground, we're not working within our hours, right? We're working within those community hours. So when we talk about that trust, like Talib had talked about earlier, that trust was going out there with him, explaining that we were there to offer help, that we wanted the violence to stop and the help. And he really, really, really held us accountable. He would call the lieutenant and be like, okay, when is the next call in? Did Isabel reach out? Will reach out to me because I did dual the role. When I was doing the work, I was doing the outreach and I was also doing the project management. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But he would call me and hold me accountable and said, I know that such and such person reached out to you because I spoke with him and he gave me permission to talk with you. I even met with 2 of the guys that I couldn't get in touch with for, to sit down and offer them help. And he was at that table. And because he now trusted us and he had his street credibility and he knew that that window that we had with him and with the guys, we knew that we had to fully show up and that we really had to keep our promise and really thank him also and keep him involved as we were planning because he really wanted to be a part of the conversation. So the way that we did that also was, and we didn't think at the time that these were community meetings, we would have social service, the chief, the community. He started to attend some of those meetings and we talked about what were the needs in the community? What were we seeing? I know the police department was out there doing barbecues and it was great and a lot of the people appreciated it, but we wanted to really make sure that we were at those barbecues, that if we were going out to those barbecues, I was going to be there, we were going to be offering help. We were going to have other folks there that were working within the community to offer help. That really was the strength that the whole model worked on the ground really well. It was because we had that community involvement and because we were out in that community And people are now seeing you with the people that they are, day to day are out there doing the work. So if you are thinking of working the model, if there's something that you're doing already in your community, enhance it. You take bits and pieces when you're working in the community. Nothing's going to be perfect. Talib said something earlier that I know these South Bend folks are on here, and I was laughing yesterday because, and I know Isaac is gonna laugh when he hears this, when they were talking about, you're not always gonna get along. And if you do say that you're always getting along and you're not having those hard conversations, and you're gonna walk into rooms and you're gonna say, okay, you guys are not doing this right. You made this promise, but you're doing something else. I know Isaac had mentioned something yesterday about, you can't come in here and arrest somebody when we're telling them that we're helping them, right? So those are the things, and those are the people that really go hard, the people that are on the ground, but you're gonna have those hard conversations. You really are. There were times that we were yelling, screaming, we wouldn't like each other, and we were arguing, the people that we worked with. But that just was the passion for the work. When we talk about who's at that table, like Talib said, you could invite some folks and you can uninvite some folks. And sometimes, and I'm going to age myself here, and I'm going to give you this example. About 3 weeks ago, I was invited over to the college, something non-work related, and I was speaking to the young ladies that were going through finals, and I brought my 16-year-old daughter along. And I had made some reference, and when I was done, she said to me, she goes, do you really think they listen to you? Like, you use those words from 1960. And I was like, I wasn't born in 1960, But I said to her, how should I have said it best for them to understand that I get what they're going through? And she was like, you may not get everything that they're going through. So you may not be the person that should be in front of them, delivering this message. That was a little, that bruised the ego a little bit, but she was right. And I think that when we're doing the work, sometimes we have officers and sometimes we have street outreach people that are just not fit for the job. They may be able to help with something else, but they may cause more harm being in front of the community than good. So everybody has a role. Everybody has a role when we are working with the community, when we are out there. When you have people that are speaking to the community, you may have some guys that have done time and come home, and the guys are calling them, oh, these are the old heads, right? We don't want to listen to them, right? So they have, you bring them along and accustomed them, and the guys are looking at them, and some of them have, they have great wisdom. Our wisdom doesn't go away, and I try to say that to the generation, right? Just like the work, our wisdom doesn't go away with the work. But we sometimes have to really have an honest look and say, listen, I'm not fit for this. I could help with this and I can steer this, but let me find the right person. You may have officers that may want to come unaccustomed, but don't have that ability to speak, or the patience to speak, or even the relevance to speak on what we're trying to convey. So I always say, be careful, people's feelings are going to be hurt when we're having these, meetings and hard conversations. Another way of that, having that community moral voice at your call-ins is also, who are you bringing to deliver that message? Who are we putting in front of us? I know that there were a few times that we would have some community moral voices that we wanted them to be a part. So we'll invite them to the rehearsal, and we wanted to hear. It's not that we want to script what you have to say, especially a mother who's lost a child. And we had an amazing mom who lost a child to gun violence in our community. And the way that she delivered her message was, you couldn't tell her, I'm going to tell you how to share your pain, right? Or how to share your story for the community. But the way that she shared her story was always a way that the guys listened. She would have walks for her daughter that was, killed in a Halloween party. And a lot of the guys would come out because that was the sense of respect that they had for her. And also it was a testament to what she was doing in that community with the guys. So she was the right person, right? We had someone before that, she was good, but that she just wasn't comfortable. And there was no relation. She lived in the city for maybe, I think it was, I want to say a couple of years. She wasn't ingrained in the community. So a lot of people didn't know her. So it's important to find those people that are in your community, that are doing the daily in and out, that are not just coming when we're doing the barbecues, when there's the pictures. It is those people that are going to have those hard conversations, that are going to really work on helping those that are in need. Because one thing I say, it's like when you go into somebody's house, even when you do a custom, we still have to respect people's boundaries and space, right? We just can't go in and, sit down. I mean, I would always ask, hey, do you mind, can we come in? Still giving them that respect and that dignity when you're gonna have a conversation with them, whether they are a part of a group and you're there to say, I know that you're part of this group, or whether the victim or whether they're the perpetrator. We still have to treat people with dignity and respect in order to expect the same when we are out there doing the work and when we're trying to gain credibility with the folks that are on the ground doing the work. So we have to make sure that we are also checking ourselves, because a lot of times, this is a collaborative effort. And as we're evolving and as we're changing things, sometimes we have to say, you know what, roles are changing, roles are shifting. You may do great work here. I might be the front person for this one, to be able to have people want to speak to me and to be able to have people communicate and also take the offer of help. I think that when you having, the community people that are doing the work in the community, are they really doing the work in the community, or are we putting things on, on a website that's dated of what we have done in the past, right? Are we doing that? So that is also how your credibility is shot in the streets if you're not really. And as a project manager, I always tell project managers, I encourage you, after COVID, a lot of these numbers and a lot of these things that you're sending people have changed. Do your due diligence to knock on these doors, to meet people, to go and introduce, what the work is about. And even if there is community things happening, if there are memorials, I'm not saying that everything is, you have to be careful. There's safety issues with certain things. But if there's things going on in the community that are important to that community, show up. Show up, and just don't show up when you want them to come to your call-in or when you need them to come to a custom notification for you. I think that we're showing up for those events, and people can see you out in the community, and you yourself are getting your credibility in your community. And I think I said a lot, so I'm going to pause for any questions. I know that we want to make this as conversational as possible, so please, I encourage you to participate once. I'm going to hand it over to Michael.
Thank you so much, Isabel, and thank you, Talib, for your two amazing presentations. So folks, now that was basically the fundamentals and principles of the community moral voice role within the GVI, or Focused Deterrence Violence Prevention Strategy, and then the actual real world application and experience and what it's like working with those folks, managing those folks, finding those folks. So those are kind of both halves that represent the entire piece of the community moral voice within the strategy. So we want to open it up to questions and discussions. I know there's already one question in the chat. If folks want to put whatever questions you have into the chat, we'll field them to Liam and Isabel. Or if you want to raise your hand using the Zoom hand raising button, we could field questions that way and kind of get at what folks are taking away and thinking about following those presentations. And while other folks are crafting or thinking about questions or follow-ups they have, I could take the first question that was put in the chat. Was, who in your network has a strong moral voice component that others could visit and learn from? I know, Talib, you were talking about how the peer exchanges are really important, and they're kind of a central piece of NNSC's work. So are there any sites or jurisdictions or folks where their work is really exemplary that we would kind of want to highlight for people on this call to maybe get in touch with or learn from?
Yeah, I'm gonna put Isaac on the spot in a second, but I'm gonna give him time to warm up. So there are three places that come to mind off the top of my head. But I do want to go back to the point that Isabel made about pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. There have been a number of cities that had some really robust community moral voice components, or at least different pieces of it. But then people either not meeting in person or just the craziness of the pandemic in and of itself. I think there was a lot of social bonds that were frayed in a lot of ways for a lot of different reasons over that time period. And so I'm not sure if the places that I'm about to mention are exactly in the same place that they were when I knew of it, but they are still examples that I think have been good to emulate. One is Minneapolis. They had a pretty, at one point in time, I think they were one of the few sites that actually had a working community moral voice group, like a group that met regularly and was active. We actually supported them by doing a storytelling training with the Moth, which is a nonprofit storytelling organization. We had partnered with the Moth to do a storytelling workshop with the community moral voice group there, which not only helped strengthen their bonds amongst the group, but also helped them learn about telling stories, right? And telling stories in a way that are relevant, to tell stories that are from scars, not from wounds, in the sense of being able to talk about past trauma and hurts that have happened, and communicate with people in ways where people aren't just reliving their trauma, but are able to speak in ways that can be healthy and productive and positive. So yeah, so Minneapolis had a very strong community moral voice working group that my understanding worked in partnership with law enforcement and support and outreach. Now the pandemic and then the murder of George Floyd and the unrest that happened after that, I think may have had an impact on that implementation. And so I don't think it's where it was before, say in 2019. But if if you talk to Sasha Cotton, who is now at NNSC, our senior director of strategy and the first head of their Office of Violence Prevention, she may be able to give some more insight, as well as folks who had been involved with that implementation from several years back. Miami-Dade currently, I don't think they have a community moral voice working group per se, but they do have a lot of community walks. Wayne Rollins, who's the project manager there, has something called the Walking One Stop, where they literally bring social services out to the community. And I think he mentioned that on one of our previous workshop calls. In Miami-Dade, they also do a phenomenal job of getting multiple people involved in the implementation in some way, whether it's at a Walking One Stop, whether it's at a call-in, whether it's on at a custom. Got local artists to make a video about the trade school that was it was called Career in a Year. If you look it up, I'm finding the link. And anybody have the link to Career in a Year? The Miami-Dade Juvenile Services Career in a Year video. They had one of the local rappers creating this video as part of the partnership. So that was really great. And then another city that has some really great implementation, I think, is South Bend. I know they had, Gladys Muhammad is a legend in South Bend. They have a local community center, historic African American history center there. And I know they have had a lot of tough conversations between community leaders and law enforcement and support and outreach. And so I look to South Bend also as an example, but I don't know if Isaac is available, who can speak to that, or even I forgot the exact rank now of Officer Ruskowski. I forgot whether it's officer, detective, general, lieutenant. I'm sorry, I'm captain.
Or chief, or general, lieutenant, whatever, colonel, whatever you want to lead. It's up to you.
Sorry,
man.
I apologize, Chief. I'm sorry. I didn't want to say Scott. I thought that would be pretty inappropriate, so I didn't know what to.
No, that's fine. Now that is absolutely fine. Isaac is on, but yeah, just a quick one. You're absolutely spot on with Gladys Muhammad. You also have Lynn Coleman, who I know you know, and then Deb Stanley. Isaac can go in further, but they have a group that constantly meets, including a retired judge, Roland Shamley. So there's a huge combination of moral voices, but it's pretty much restricted to Gladys. But I'll let Isaac chime in. I saw that he just chimed up or giggled or something when you said colonel or major or whatever you called me.
Yes, Lee, you're giving them too much power. Our chief and Deborah Stanley, as Lynn has said, is we're building out our moral voice. Pastor Wayne in Florida has a better moral voice probably than we do at this point, because we're just now building it out. But that walk and stop that they do in Florida is probably one of the best that's done in the United States. And you can build this moral voice out to the point to where we try to set it up where they're the voice of the community. They set up when we decide that we want to do a press conference because the shooting didn't happen. We're getting them engaged in our custom notifications more. But the more voice to really be incompatible with the social services GVI. If you really build it out and you got people that's really engaged and want to be involved in that section. Isabel gave a real good explanation of the more voice, and you as well as Tilly. But I think we don't fund the more voice. And I think if you fund the more voice where it's at a point to where they have the funding, they don't have to wait for social service or the project manager to fund them to be able to do events in the community, to be able to do PSAs and promotional stuff about GVI and why it's good for the community. Because when you have the more voice who has the credibility and all the part of the credible message of the community, when they're able to brand GVI in your city, it really takes people start looking at it a different way because they're credible messages. So that would be the suggestion or add-on that I would give to it is just how do we make them, they already have the credibility, but they can't do it without additional funding. I hope everybody heard me.
No, yeah, we heard you. Sorry, I was trying to come off mute and say thanks, because that's a really important point, and to the point that you were making. Traditionally speaking, the community moral voice aspect has not been a funded piece as part of the strategy, but again, there's been the traditional way, and then there's the modern way, and then there's the future way, right? And so we are definitely constantly evolving with the model. And part of the reason why we have these workshops is we want other people to evolve as well. We don't want people to just say, oh, I read about this GVI thing back in 2015, so I'm going to do what they did in 2015. Because we're going to say, no, do not do that, right? So, GVI in 2024 might have a funded community moral voice component where people are receiving stipends, right, as part of their regular engagement. That could be something that your city wants to do. Again, so that if you want people to feel bought in and not feel like this is an extractive extractive endeavor, but is an endeavor that actually respects and values them and their time and their labor as experts in the community, right? So that is one thing that sites may want to look at, and I know we definitely will be looking at how do we enhance and retool and revise the model. So I really appreciate that point from Isaac. And I also want to thank my colleague Audrey for putting into the chat Career in the Year by G. Savage, which is, I love this video just because, it just kind of shows you what's possible. It's not what you typically think about when you think about, GVI. This is not locking anybody up. This is not even necessarily support and outreach. This is not, but bringing in folks who have moral authority and credibility in the community to say, hey, here are other options for you, right? And to Isabel's point, right? I got gray in my beard, right? Some people, they're not listening to me. Like, it's just, I would love for people to think that, people are gonna listen to what I say, but that's just not the reality. But listen to G. Savage, right? And he's saying, hey, go to this technical school, you get a whole career in a year, you could be doing all these other things, right? So to Isabel's point, and to what other folks have been saying, there's different ways to get your community involved. So shout out to Wayne Rollins and the entire Miami-Dade folks, and shout out to G. Savage and Black Man Music Group. And thanks, Audrey, for putting that link in the chat. I don't know if there are any other questions, Michael, or are we
Yeah, folks, if you have anything, feel free to throw it in the chat or raise your hand. I was just, to leap to your point, going to add on about the Miami-Dade walking one-stops, which are those events we've been talking about, where they're essentially walking call-ins where community members join with law enforcement and support and outreach and kind of go to door to door and engage folks around the community. They're extremely successful, to the point that I think about a week and a half ago in Miami-Dade, they conducted a walking one-stop where they went to 41 different houses and signed them up for support and services. So, and it's not, the reason that these are successful is not because it's just cops knocking on people's doors. They're going with this, all parts of the stool. They're going with the law enforcement and the support and outreach, but of course they're going with these community moral voice members who have that legitimacy and are able to kind of talk to folks and get them to engage in ways where other officials might not be able to. And to the point that they're so successful that they're getting dozens and dozens and dozens of houses in one community on one afternoon to sign up for all sorts of programs. Talib, you're on mute if you're trying to speak.
Sorry, thank you. To that point, Michael, I'm not sure if Miami-Dade specifically does this, so I don't want to put them on the spot or the hook for it. But one thing that I have heard of the city's doing is, you mentioned they did 41 houses, right? Well, let's say that there are 10 houses in a neighborhood in which like you need some attention, right? Like we, again, safe, alive, and free, right? So we don't want to wait until there's a shooting, right, or a homicide to respond with a certain kind of response. But let's say people in the community, right? Like everybody knows that those, like this house, like we all, like everybody knows that like these are the areas that we should have attention to. Well, if you've got 10 houses, but if you go to 30 houses, right? Those 10 houses, right, are not then singled out as being problems or being on a list, right, of folks who are special and need attention, right? Like you're doing it in a broad-based way where you're going to people who, a range of people may need different support or attention and love and care, but you're also making sure, right, that because again, part of the whole model is about being strategic, right, and being focused in our resources to make sure that those who are the most at risk of committing or being victims of violence are being able to receive the support that they need, and to be able to get it in a way that does not single them out, right, or ostracize them, or paint them in a way that they are somehow different or less than anybody else in the community. Now I'll pass to Isabel.
I just wanted to add, because you said something really key, not singling people out, right? So when we're doing these community events, we have to be mindful, right? So let's say it's that, and we've done it here in Newburgh, it's that one block that's just completely hot. It's just things are happening, folks are out all hours of the night, things are happening, making, lots of calls of service to that area. When I talked about earlier going out to these barbecues, I say, bring the resources, use that as an opportunity to bring all the resources that you can think of, that these guys that you really have in mind that live in that radius or in that area might need that help. Bring those resources. I mean, it's great to bring, and I know that a lot of times we only think about the folks that need medical, right? That we're bringing people to sign up for medical health coverages. That is something that people already kind of know, right? And are able to go in and sign up, but we got to really be, think outside of the box when we're bringing those resources to that area. And also for the police officers that are putting together the barbecues, bring it with a spin, have a spin to it. So we don't highlight, like Talib said, we're not just going to knock on these. We're going to, cops got to do their jobs. We have to do our jobs when we're doing our customs. But if we know that this is an entire area that we don't want to single some people out, let's bring it all to that corner for a couple of hours. So those are other ways to brainstorm with your community on, what do you think this area may need? You may have a community representative going to the meetings, and they would probably be able to give you an idea of what is it that this community needs, that we can start bringing to get some of that credibility that, we're looking to, if we're starting out with the model. And a lot of times, project managers that come into some communities may not be as experienced in that community. So these are ways that they can start to gain that knowledge for that community. Let's bring it all out to the community.
And to that point, also want to speak to the kind of the flip side. I think sometimes the reason why, in some cases, GVI is not as well, well received in certain areas is because community members are not included, right? You may have maybe a well-meaning group of folks that push to have GVI come. We have well-meaning elected officials, or you have well-meaning law enforcement officials who say, we want to bring this GVI thing. We've heard about it. You know, we've read about it. We've heard it worked other places. We're going to bring it here, right? And so they start off with the strategic enforcement. They have some services for support and outreach, right? But the community engagement piece isn't there. And so even though support and outreach and law enforcement may be moving with the best of intentions, right? People in the community are looking at it skeptically, and they're saying, no, this is a trick, right? Because we've been tricked before. Because again, violence is highest in populations that have been most marginalized and tricked, hoodwinked, bamboozled, and led astray, right? For generations, right? And so folks are gonna say, we're not falling for the okie doke again. You may say that this is a group audit, but we think you're making a gang database. You may say that you're doing support and outreach. We think it's just carrot and stick. You may say that you are trying to provide positive engagement with those who are the most at risk, and we think you're just singling people out. You may say you want community engagement, and we think you just want us to talk to the popo and talk to the cops and put ourselves in danger, right? One thing I did learn from Miami-Dade, and I want to give them a shout out because, you know, Wayne Rawlins really stressed this, is when we first did GVI in Miami-Dade, he really made it a point to get as many community partners together to learn about what was about to happen before it happened. Like before GVI even started, he was like, Talib, I want you to come down and talk to everybody. I was like, Wayne, we don't do that, right? That's not what we do. We go, we work with, you know, and he's like, Talib, I'm telling you, it's important. I need you to come down and talk to these people. I'm like, Wayne, fine, Wayne, that's what you think? We'll do that. So we got like 60 some odd people, and it was a lot of people. I'm like, oh my goodness, like, it's not what we do. Wayne is like, trust me, it's gonna work. He was right. And people, I stood up there and people peppered me with questions, and they were like, what is GVI? What is this? What is that? And we answered their questions, and we talked to the county commission. And they were like, what is this? We talked, and we went to some local activist group, you know. But by the time we got there talking to everybody, they felt like they were part of the process. And they were like, okay, you know what I mean? Like, all right, you know what I mean? And that really helped out. So I use that as an example that even if you don't have a robust community moral voice working group just yet, even if you don't have all of those components, the walking ones, if you don't have all of that just yet, just the communication in and of itself, again, communication, trust, foundation of any relationship, just the communication itself can be very helpful and go a long way to getting buy-in to the strategy for the implementation.
Thank you, Talib. And I was just going to add to that, that I don't think it's a coincidence that that kind of community engagement in Miami-Dade is why we keep referring to Wayne and Miami-Dade as one of our kind of premier examples of places for folks to look to for peer learning, peer leadership, is because they, from the get-go, they've brought the community in and they have that kind of buy-in and legitimacy in that they're able to do these other facets of GVI or the focused deterrence work while laying that bedrock cornerstone before actually starting any of the enforcement or any of the other pieces or spokes of the GVI work. They've had that from the beginning and continue to do so every week when they're going out with the community and bringing them on these walking one stops, on the customs, on the call-ins, which they always do.
And I actually want to, this brings up a different idea, which doesn't have anything to do with Miami-Dade, but in reflecting upon the relationships there, one thing that it reminds me of is that if you do have a strong community moral voice component, you know, you have a strong working group that meets regularly, that that is active in the implementation, that is building those partnerships. When something goes wrong, and something will go wrong, I promise you, something is going to go wrong, either with the implementation or outside the implementation. Having those relationships already established is key. So for example, one of the big things during the past few years, during the pandemic, was, after George Floyd was murdered, we saw a wave of unrest, not just in the United States, but also even in other countries. And things are going to happen. Nobody is perfect, right? No support and outreach organization is perfect. No community member or leader is perfect. No law enforcement agency isn't perfect. Nobody, we live in a very imperfect world. But if you have those partnerships and those relationships that are already built in, when something goes wrong, having people who can pick up the phone and call each other and say, hey, what's going on here, makes a huge, I can't tell you the difference that it makes, right? Because they may not know, Chief Wiskowski, they know Scott, right? I know Scott. You mean Scott from, no, I know Scott. You might be talking about somebody else, but I know Scott, you know what I mean? For example, in New Haven, I know Carl, I'm forgetting Carl's last name. I'm doing horrible with honorifics.
Jacobson.
Yes. Say it again.
Jacobson.
Carl Jacobson. Yes, thank you. Because it's like, now he is chief, right? Before he was like sergeant, then he was lieutenant, and now he's Chief Jacobson. But when you meet him, he's Carl, right? And so in New Haven, not to tell their story, but there was a situation where there was a police involved incident, right? But people knew Carl, right? People knew Carl, right? Because Carl had been out and engaging with the community in certain ways. And so it wasn't the same thing you might have seen like in some other places, right? Because they were like, no, but not that whatever happened was okay, but we know the relationship is there, right? And so I really want to stress that with this three-legged stool, strategic law enforcement, community involved voice support, and outreach, that partnership piece is so important, that has dividends beyond just did the violence go up or did the violence go down. And having those community members, that community involved voice support is really key for a number of pieces. And I'm gonna pass it over to Isabel.
When you talk about relationships, right, just like anything in life, right, we have to build our relationships, right? We had a lieutenant at the time that we were doing the work, and he had a work phone, and he would give his cell phone number to people. Give me a call. If there's a problem, give me a call. Let's cut the red tape of you have to leave a message in the front. And so if you're capable, I'm not saying for everybody to do that, but if you have that capability, right, we have work phones when we're given work phones, give the number, give that card with your number. And what he used to do was, right, his card would have his office number, and he would turn it around and write the cell phone number as he was there and say, I'm going to just give you my cell phone number, call me directly. And that made a whole world of a difference with the outreach folks, with the folks that we were going and doing customs with the folks out in the street. That made a world of a difference when you're building those relationships and answering the phone, not just giving somebody your card. I'm going to give you my cell phone, but then when they answer, when they text you or they call you, you don't answer. So I think that was another way that people kind of test you to see if you're really, really going to be available or really going to be around when they need you and you're trying to build your relationship. That also goes for our project managers. I think that we put it a lot on the street outreach, we put it a lot on the police department, but we have a due diligence as project managers to build those relationships. Because when we think about it, we're the bridge that's bringing everybody together and keeping things together. So we have to also remember that we too are responsible for building those relationships. And if we can't do something, just say, I can't do it. I don't have an answer for you right now. Instead of over promising and overreaching, and then we can come through and then we lose our credibility as a project manager. Say, I'm going to find the person that can steer you in the right direction and follow up. I think it's all in the follow up. And that, I'm going to end with that. I know we're almost about to wrap up.
No, that was a great point, Isabel. Thank you. And thank you again for your presentation, and Talib for yours. I'm just going to go over a couple of quick housekeeping items before we let you all loose for the day. Bear with me one more minute. All right. So thank you for joining us today. Our next session will be about law enforcement and police legitimacy. So that's the third part of the stool that we keep referring to. We've covered support and outreach last session. Community More Voices this session. And then next time we'll cover law enforcement and police legitimacy, which is that third prong, on Thursday, July 13th. And then future sessions are going to be deep dives on other aspects of our work, including, like we were just talking about, managing those partnerships and resources and figuring out how everyone works together, our intimate partner violence intervention, hospital-based intervention programs, and other facets of the focus deterrence and GVI strategies. As always, you could email me at gviworkshop@nnscommunities.org with any questions. If you have folks that you want to refer to come to next session or join the series, you're more than welcome to. If you have any questions about sites specifically, like I know today people were asking for good examples of Community More Voices, just shoot me an email. And you could visit our website, nnscommunities.org/GVI Workshop, where we'll have all the material from this session uploaded. So we'll have the recording, the slide decks, and any other materials that we decide are really relevant to the material covered today. So you could go there for the videos from the previous sessions, the materials from today's sessions, and info on any upcoming sessions. So thank you again for joining us. Feel free to reach out with any questions, and we hope to see you at the next session. Oh, and I just see the question in the chat. The recording of the first class is already on our website, but if you can't find it, feel free to email me at that email address. Thank you so much, all. Have a good day.